Zack Snyder's brand new sci-fi action movie Rebel Moon Part 1 is coming out on Netflix this week, and the chatter online about it has been absolutely wild. But now that I've seen it for myself, is it actually as bad as some of the critics are saying? Well, let's get into it. What's up, my dude? Your friendly neighborhood Tony here, and as I do with all my movie reviews, I'm gonna give you a little bit of information about Rebel Moon, who's working on it, what it's about, all that good stuff. Then I'm gonna go into the pros and cons, things I did and did not like about the movie. And finally, I'll let you know who Rebel Moon is for, if anyone. If that kind of thing sounds cool to you and you want to keep up to speed on all the new big movies that are coming out in theaters and on streaming, make sure you subscribe. All right, so some backstory here. First off, I want to let you know I am a pretty big Zack Snyder fan. Now that said, I'm not one of those rabid fans that thinks he can do no wrong, but the truth of the matter is every Zack Snyder movie I've seen up to this point, I've enjoyed at least a little, if not thought it was pretty great. And that's going all the way back to Dawn of the Dead, which I thought was amazing. 300 is a movie that came out when I was a teenager and was really impactful for me at that time. Watchmen, I thought he did an incredible job with. Now, I've never actually seen The Legend of the Guardians, you know, that Owl movie, or Sucker Punch, so I can't really speak to either of those. But Man of Steel is my favorite DCEU movie, period. And even though Batman v Superman had some good and bad points, overall, I enjoyed it. And I also think Justice League is absolutely not his fault. In fact, the Zack Snyder's version of Justice League, I think, is a masterpiece. Oh, and more recently, Army of the Dead, I thought was really fun too. So yeah, every Zack Snyder movie I've seen, I've enjoyed, but did I enjoy Rebel Moon? Oh, we're gonna get into that. Before we do, let me give you a quick plot summary about the movie so you know in general what it's about. So according to IMDb here, when a peaceful settlement at the edge of a distant moon finds itself threatened by the armies of a tyrannical ruling force, a mysterious stranger living among its villagers becomes their best hope for survival. So if that concept sounds familiar to, it's because we've seen that, of course, time and time again. It's a pretty standard trope when it comes to the group of heroes going to defend a helpless village. It goes all the way back to Akira Kurosawa and Seven Samurai. And of course, we've seen different versions of Seven Samurai throughout the years, time and time again. Now, originally, this movie was pitched by Zack Snyder to Lucasfilm back in 2012 when Disney bought up Lucasfilm, and it was supposed to be his version or his take on a Star Wars movie. They, of course, shot it down. Then he kind of pitched it around a little here and there. I know at a certain point it was supposed to be a TV series and even a video game at another time. And ultimately it settled with Netflix as a couple of movies, and that's where we are now. Now, the budget for the movie is kind of split between this and the sequel. It's a total of $166 million across both movies. So, you know, a reasonably healthy budget for a movie like this. And part 2 is set to release April 19th, so in just a few months. The movie stars Sofia Boutella, who is someone that you've probably seen in a couple movies here and there. She was in The Kingsman: Secret Service, and she's also known for being a professional dancer, a really high-level dancer, which is something that I think really works in these kind of action movies. You know, a lot of times you think that your action star has to be a martial arts expert, but not really. They just have to know how to control their body. So someone like her, who's a really good dancer, is great for these kind of action movies. Or even someone like Jason Statham. A lot of people think Statham is like a lifelong martial artist, and when he got into these action movies, he definitely wasn't. He was in fact an Olympic level diver. Yes, that's right. And there are videos online of young Jason Statham diving off of a high board. So it's really just about being able to control your body. So I think she does a great job as far as that's concerned, but we'll get more into that with the pros. You also have Djimon Hounsou in this movie, who is amazing. I love Djimon Hounsou. I've seen him in a million movies and he always does really well. Charlie Hunnam's in it as well, who seems to be having a really great time in his role. It's good to see Ray Fisher back with Zack Snyder. I know he had a bit of a falling out with Warner Brothers over Justice League, but it looks like him and Zack Snyder are doing just fine. Sir Anthony Hopkins has a smaller role in the movie, but he's definitely there, as well as Corey Stoll and Cary Elwes, who are a couple of actors that, again, you've probably seen a million times. And as far as like the main villain of the movie, it's Ed Skrein, who was also the main villain in the first Deadpool movie, and he is so creepy in this role. You can really tell that he lost a bunch of weight and kind of has this gaunt appearance that just makes you kind of feel icky every time you see him, but it really, really works for what he's trying to do. So, okay, now that we've kind of touched on who's in the movie and, you know, kind of what I think about them overall, let's get a little bit more into the pros. So first up, and we've already touched on it, the casting, I think, is fantastic. It's all people that are incredibly talented, and I think for the roles that they're given, they really fit those characters. You can also tell that Zack Snyder spent a lot of time building out this universe that everything takes place in. It really feels like there's so much of a history history there that you want to explore. There's all this backstory and different factions and wars that took place. So it really feels like this isn't something that he just slapped together, but rather something that's probably been tooling around in his mind for years. Also, I think some of the alien creatures, of course, it takes place in space and there's a lot of alien creatures. Some of them look pretty amazing. There's some really cool costumes and some really great makeup and just some interesting creatures throughout the movie, both in the way that they look and also kind of in the way that they navigate the world. It's some unique stuff. I also really like the way that they blend this futuristic sci-fi world with kind of this civilizations with like knights and armor and all of that. It's kind of a cool blend of futuristic and old school. It really just feels like there's so much to explore here, which is why I think it would have been better served as a series, which unfortunately kind of leads me to my cons. But before we get into the cons, I want to let you know that this video is sponsored by you. That's right, I'm just a tiny little channel here without any big corporate sponsors or anything like that. So just by watching the videos, you're really helping me out. If you want to be super dope though, do me a solid and just click the like button below the video. Also, right now, I'm making a massive push to try to get to 2,000 subscribers by the end of the year. We're getting really close, but time is running out. So if you want to keep up to speed on all the new movies that are coming out on streaming and in theaters, and if you like this kind of review, maybe consider subscribing. If you do, I appreciate it. All right, here we go with the cons. And this is the part where the Zack Snyder diehards are gonna hate me. Probably the biggest thing that stands out to me is that none of the characters feel really fleshed out. Honestly, I barely remember half of their names, let alone feel connected to them as a person. And as I said, there's so much to explore in this movie, but they just don't do that. They're rushing through scene after scene without letting you sit with the characters or really get to know them. Also, some of the characters make horribly stupid decisions in the movie, and it's so much so that you know that the only reason that they're doing what they're doing is to move the plot along, because no rational person would make some of these choices. And I don't want to get into spoilers with that, but there's a particular point towards the latter half of the movie where one of the bad guys does something that is just so nonsensical. It doesn't make any sense other than that they need to do that in order for the movie to move forward. Speaking of the bad guys, they are cartoonishly evil in this movie. And I get it. They're, you know, the evil empire or whatever, but some of the things that they do is just so over the top and really just feels unrealistic. It's one of those things where it's a military force, and generally in a military force, there is going to be some level of order in how things are done. And yet you have certain members just kind of doing whatever they want to do with no regard for order or regulation or anything like that, all just to really drive it home that, hey, these people are evil. So in case you weren't sure, here are some scenes of them doing horrifically evil things to each other, even at some points. It's a bit much. And as I mentioned with the characters and how you don't feel that you're getting enough of them, it really does feel like they introduce a new character, show a cool slow motion action sequence with them, and then just kind of have them join the party of heroes. And then we just move on. And there's nothing really being fleshed out about them or their backstory other than some really surface level stuff. Speaking of the action sequences though, I really wonder how long this movie would be if they removed all the slow motion or just sped it up to normal speed, because it is egregious how much of that quick, slow, patented Zack Snyder look they do throughout this movie. And I don't mind that from time to time. At times, it can look really cool, right? There are some legendary moments in different Zack Snyder movies, especially 300, where he uses that quick, slow kind of change of pace, and it looks awesome. But here, they do it constantly. There is a scene where someone is planting seeds, just tossing seeds into a field. And they use that kind of slow motion thing as they're tossing the seeds out into the field. And it's so ridiculous because it serves no purpose. And it almost feels like he just wanted to throw that in at certain intervals throughout the movie, regardless of what was going on. Somebody's brushing their teeth, slow motion. No, that doesn't actually happen. But I'm just saying, like, it felt like that was his thought process going into it, where it's like, oh, it's been 3 minutes, we need another slow motion scene. Also, if you remember 300, there's a famous scene where one of the characters is jumping off of a rock and it does that big leap in slow motion and he comes down and cuts somebody's arm off, I think. Well, they do that exact same scene several times in this movie. Like, it's not even slightly different. It is the exact same thing of a heroic character leaping in slow motion to strike an enemy. It honestly made me laugh at times. Also, my dude loves himself some lens flare. Maybe more than J.J. Abrams, I'm not gonna lie. I'm not sure if they were using anamorphic lenses, but there was so much lens flare on the screen at different times, and just randomly, like you're sitting in a room and there's like a few lights and the lens flare is covering half the screen, so you can barely see what's going on. That, and he cranks down the aperture so much in his lenses that almost nothing is in focus. So if you're not familiar with aperture and how that works, right now you see me in focus, but my background is a little blurry. Now, if you have a lens that has a high enough aperture, you can get that to where barely anything is in focus and everything else is blown out and blurry. And a number of times in this movie, it's literally to the point where you can see one eyeball on the character and the rest of their face is blurry. It's insane. And I guess it's cool that you have that kind of technology, but it doesn't serve the story because you can't see what's going on. Also, speaking a little bit more about the way that the movie looks, there is CG everywhere. It is a CG nightmare. And it's honestly not that good. There were a number of scenes where it, to me, reminded me of Starship Troopers, which is not a movie that has really great CG. It just looked really poor at times. Some of the ships, some of the cities, some of the backdrops, you can tell they were just standing in front of a giant green screen. And it's like they didn't even attempt to make it look realistic. And because of that, the environment doesn't feel real, which of course lessens the stakes because then you realize you're just watching people in front of a green screen. Also, the dialogue in the movie is so clunky and cheesy and predictable. Now, look, I know the story has been done a million times, right? It is a famous type of story, but that doesn't mean that everything should be so formulaic that you can completely predict what someone's gonna say before they say it. Like, give us some originality. There's a scene in the trailer, so it's not a spoiler at all, but there's a scene where the bad guys, have come to this village and someone asks the main protagonist, Sofia Boutella's character, what do they want? And she responds in the most dramatic way by saying everything. And that is just the most minor example of them just saying the most obvious and tropey possible line of dialogue. I really want Zack Snyder to team up with somebody to help him write these screenplays. He's very clearly a visual director, and that's awesome, and I love that, but my guy cannot write dialogue, or at the very least, he just needs someone there to keep him in line. Because when left to his own devices, it's no bueno. The movie is just one heavy-handed monologue after another, just exposition being spilled in the most clunky way with different fight scenes in between that aren't even really that great, which is what you're really looking for in a movie like this. I'm not going into a Zack Snyder movie expecting Shakespeare. I understand that he is a visual director who does a lot of really cool action. And when I feel like the action sequences aren't even up to par with what he normally does, it's a big letdown. Okay, and one last con I have to touch on here. So we know that this movie is PG-13, and there's already been a bunch of chatter about Zack Snyder having a longer cut R-rated version of the movie, which has kind of become his thing now ever since it really worked with the Justice League. But the Justice League situation was very specific. He wasn't allowed to finish that movie, or he wasn't able to finish that movie, so he came back and did his own cut of it. Putting out an unfinished, limited version of this and then saying, oh, but just wait until the full version, the full uncut version, that to me it's a little slimy. And I know all of the big Zack Snyder fans are gonna be like, oh man, I can't wait to watch the rated R version. I can't wait to watch the uncut version or the Zack Snyder cut. But it just really feels like a slimy way of double dipping on your fans when it's like, oh, I'm gonna give you this unfinished version, but I promise I'll give you the finished one later on if you stick around. That just doesn't sit well with me. So, all right, who do I think Rebel Moon is for? Well, again, I have to tell you, I am a Zack Snyder fan. I like every Zack Snyder movie I've ever seen, except this one. But if you're the kind of Zack Snyder fan who just loves everything he does without regard, then yeah, you'll probably enjoy Rebel Moon. A lot of people crap on Zack Snyder and say all he makes are big, dumb action movies. And I don't agree with that. But even as a big, dumb action movie, Rebel Moon does not work for me. It commits the most serious sin that a, quote, big, dumb action movie can commit. And that is, for large parts of the movie, it's boring, with action sequences that are just poor imitations of what he's already done before. It really feels like all style and no substance, and the style isn't even that stylish. But if nothing else, there's a bunch of greased up, shredded dudes, so it's got that going for it. And maybe you can play a game of Spot the Star Wars reference. Either way, if Rebel Moon Part 1, A Child of Fire, sounds interesting to you, Check it out on Netflix this week. And if you've already seen it, let me know what you think in the comments below. Of course, this is just my opinion. I'm sure a lot of you are gonna love this movie, and if you do, I'd love to hear why. Let me know your favorite parts or your least favorite parts about Rebel Moon. And if you haven't seen it yet, how about this? What is your favorite Zack Snyder movie to date? For me, I'm gonna go with Man of Steel. It just has a special place in my heart. All right, that's gonna be it for me today. Don't forget to subscribe and help me get to 2,000 subscribers by the end of the year. Otherwise, I'll catch you in the next one. All right, be good.